The clinking of dishes and the smell of coffee are normal for a diner, right? Not at this Pennsylvania spot after dark. There are rules you have to follow, even if they make your skin crawl, because the alternative, well, you don't want to find out what the alternative is. The first time I heard the bell at 3 in the morning, I thought someone had come to the front door. That's what bells do in diners, after all. They announce arrivals, departures, the mundane rhythm of service industry life. But when I looked up from wiping down the counter, the door stood perfectly still. No customers, no wind, just that single, clear chime hanging in the air like a question mark. My name is Daniel Cruz, and I've been working the graveyard shift at the Crossroads Diner in rural Pennsylvania for 6 months now. 6 months of learning that some places have their own language, their own laws that have nothing to do with health codes or labor regulations. The Crossroads sits at the intersection of 2 county roads that most GPS systems don't even recognize anymore. It's the kind of place that's been serving coffee and pie since 1952, where the vinyl booths have been reupholstered so many times they've lost their original color, and where the neon sign out front flickers in a pattern that seems almost deliberate. During the day, it's ordinary. Truckers stop for breakfast. Local farmers gather for lunch. Families on road trips pull in for dinner, attracted by the vintage charm and the promise of homemade gravy. But when the sun goes down and the last day's shift employee clocks out at 11, the Crossroads becomes something else entirely. Something that requires its own set of instructions, passed down not through any employee handbook, but through hushed warnings and hard-learned experience. I didn't believe it at first. How could I? I'd worked restaurant jobs since I was 16, everything from fast food to fine dining. I thought I'd seen it all. Drunk customers, kitchen fires, food poisoning scares, the full catastrophic spectrum of hospitality disasters. Nothing had prepared me for the Crossroads after midnight. The manager who trained me on my first night was a woman named Beverly Pritchett. She'd been working at the Crossroads for 32 years, and she looked every day of it. Deep lines carved into her face, gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her skin, and eyes that had seen things she had no intention of discussing in detail. Beverly didn't waste time with pleasantries or the standard new employee orientation. Instead, she handed me an apron, poured herself a cup of coffee so strong it could strip paint, and said 5 words that would define my entire employment. Listen carefully. Follow the rules. What followed was the strangest training session of my life. Beverly walked me through the basic operations, the cash register, the coffee maker, how to work the ancient grill that had been installed when Eisenhower was president. But interspersed with these normal instructions were others, delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone one might use to explain how to properly fold napkins. You'll get regulars that come in between 2 and 4, she said, gesturing to the row of booths along the window. They sit in the same spots every time. You serve them quickly, you don't make eye contact, and you never, ever ask for their order. They'll point to the menu. You bring them what they point to. Black coffee for booth 3, water with lemon for booth 5, and booth 7 gets a slice of cherry pie. Heated, no ice cream. Every single time. No exceptions. I remember laughing nervously, thinking this was some kind of hazing ritual for new employees. The laugh died in my throat when Beverly's expression didn't change. She wasn't joking. She wasn't even being dramatic. She was simply stating facts. The way you tell someone that the walk-in freezer is on the left or that the bathroom key is behind the register. Why can't I ask for their order? I managed to ask. Beverly took a long sip of her coffee, her eyes drifting to the dark windows. Because they don't like questions. And when they don't like something, the whole night goes sideways. Dishes break. Lights flicker. Equipment fails. Last server who got chatty with booth 3, her car wouldn't start for 2 weeks straight. Battery was fine. Alternator was fine. Mechanics couldn't figure it out. Then she quit, and the next morning, the car started on the first try. She let that sink in before continuing. After midnight, some messes don't get cleaned up. You see spills, broken glass, things that look like they need attention. You leave them until dawn. Mark the area with a wet floor sign if you have to, but you don't touch them. This place has its own way of resetting itself by sunrise. Interfere with that process, and you'll spend the rest of your shift cleaning the same spot over and over while it just gets worse. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to understand the logic, the reason behind these bizarre instructions. But the look on Beverly's face told me that why didn't matter. Only what mattered. Only survival mattered. The jukebox in the corner was another point of emphasis. It was a genuine 1960s Wurlitzer, chrome and glass and colored lights. The kind of machine that belonged in a museum or a collector's basement. According to Beverly, it still worked, though no one had put money in it for years. Sometimes it'll start playing on its own, she explained. Middle of the night, you'll hear music. Doesn't matter if it's plugged in or not. When that happens, you let it play. You don't touch it. You don't try to turn it off or change the song. You just keep working like nothing's happening. Usually it plays 3 songs and then stops. If you interfere, it won't stop. Not for hours. And the songs it plays then, they're not on the machine's playlist. That first night, Beverly left me alone at 1:15 in the morning. The diner was empty, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional car passing on the road outside. I busied myself with prep work, refilling salt shakers, rolling silverware and napkins. Try to ignore the weight of silence that pressed down on the dining room like a physical presence. The first customer arrived at 1:45. An older man in a trucker's cap, weathered face, flannel shirt. Normal. He ordered coffee and eggs, ate quickly, left a decent tip. I started to relax, thinking maybe Beverly had been exaggerating, building up the mystique of the place for dramatic effect. Then 2:30 came around, and with it, the first of the silent regulars. I didn't hear the door open. One moment the diner was empty, and the next, a figure sat in booth 3. A woman, or at least I think it was a woman, wearing a dark coat despite the warming night. Her face was obscured by shadows that seemed too thick, too solid to be natural. She raised one pale hand and pointed at the menu, which she hadn't touched, which had been lying on the table long before she arrived. My hand shook as I poured the black coffee. I kept my eyes on the cup, watching the dark liquid rise to the brim, focusing on that simple task rather than looking at the customer, who cast no reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. When I set the cup down, those shadows shifted, and I caught a glimpse of what might have been eyes, or might have been something else entirely, something that made my stomach clench and my breath catch. I walked away quickly, returning to my position behind the counter. The coffee sat untouched for 20 minutes. Then, without any sound or movement I could detect, the customer was gone. The cup remained, empty now, though I'd never seen her drink. Next to it sat a $5 bill that looked like it had been printed decades ago. The colors slightly off, the paper texture wrong. By the time 3 o'clock rolled around, booths 3, 5, and 7 were all occupied. The silent regulars had arrived, and I moved between them like a sleepwalker, serving coffee, water, pie, never speaking, never looking directly at any of their faces. The air in the diner had changed, growing thicker, harder to breathe, as if the space itself was holding something back, containing forces that existed just beyond the edge of my perception. That's when the bell rang. 3 a.m. exactly, according to the clock on the wall. One single chime, clear and cold, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The regulars didn't react. They sat in their booths, shadows and silence, while I gripped the counter and tried to remember how to breathe normally. This wasn't hazing. This wasn't imagination. This was real, whatever real meant anymore. And I had 5 more hours until sunrise. By my 3rd week at the crossroads, I developed a routine. Not a comfortable routine, but a functional one. I'd arrive at 11, brew fresh coffee, and mentally prepare myself for the hours ahead. The silent regulars no longer made my hands shake quite as badly. I learned to serve them efficiently, mechanically, treating them like any other customers despite the way they appeared and disappeared without using the door, despite the wrongness that radiated from their booths like cold air from an open freezer. But understanding the basic rules was just the beginning. The crossroads had layers of strangeness, each one revealing itself through accidents, near misses, and the occasional story from Beverly when she felt talkative during the brief overlap of our shifts. The first major rule I broke happened on a Tuesday night, or technically Wednesday morning, around 12:30. A trucker had knocked over his water glass, sending liquid and ice cascading across the table and onto the floor. Automatic response, drilled into me by years of restaurant work. Grab a towel, wipe it up, apologize, replace the glass. I was halfway to the supply closet for the mop when I remembered Beverly's warning about after-midnight messes. I froze, one hand on the closet door, my brain warring with itself. Every instinct screamed at me to clean up the water spreading across the linoleum. It was a safety hazard. It was my job. It was what any reasonable person would do. But Beverly's words echoed louder than reason. Some messes are best left undisturbed until dawn. I grabbed a wet floor sign instead, positioned it near the spill, and returned to the counter. The trucker had already left, oblivious to my internal crisis. I spent the next 6 hours averting my eyes from that puddle, fighting the urge to just quickly wipe it up, to restore order to the chaos. Several times I caught myself walking toward it with a towel in hand, only to stop and force myself back to the counter. The puddle never spread. That's the first thing I noticed. Despite being on a slightly sloped floor, the water stayed exactly where it had fallen, edges defined as if contained by an invisible barrier. Weirder still, as the night progressed, the puddles seemed to get darker. What had been clear water at 12:30 looked gray by 2, black by 4. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows at 6:15, the puddle was gone entirely. No water, no stain, nothing. The floor was completely dry, as if the spill had never happened. I mentioned this to Beverly when she arrived at 6:30. She just nodded, unsurprised. "They absorb it," she said, pouring herself coffee. "The mess is after midnight. They're not really spills or stains. There's something else. Markers, maybe. Openings. I don't pretend to understand it, but I know that trying to clean them just makes it worse. We had a kid working here 5 years back, real go-getter type. Thought the midnight rule was superstitious nonsense. He mopped up a spill around 1 a.m., spent the rest of his shift watching that same spill reappear every 10 minutes. Same spot, same size. He'd mop it, turn around, and there it would be again. Drove him half crazy. He quit that morning and never came back. What happened to the spill? I asked. Eventually stopped reappearing at dawn, like always. But he'd interfered with something. Tried to impose order where order wasn't wanted. The crossroads doesn't like that. The jukebox made itself known on my 4th week. I'd heard it before, of course, randomly playing songs in the dead hours between 2 and 4. Usually oldies, sometimes songs I recognized, sometimes melodies that felt familiar, but just slightly wrong, as if played in a key that didn't quite exist. I'd followed Beverly's advice. Ignore it. Keep working. Let it run its course. But on this particular night, a customer had arrived around 1:30. A normal customer, or so I thought, a young woman maybe 25 years old, wearing a college sweatshirt and looking exhausted in the way that suggested she'd been driving for hours. She ordered coffee and pie, pulled out a laptop, and settled in to work on something that had her frowning at the screen and typing aggressively. At 2:15, the jukebox kicked on. Buddy Holly's Every Day started playing, the cheerful melody at odds with the dark silence of the diner. The woman looked up, smiled briefly, then returned to her work. So far, so normal. The problem came when the song ended and the next selection began. It was a song I'd never heard before, something with too many instruments playing slightly off rhythm, with lyrics in a language that hurt my throat just hearing them. The wrongness of it made my teeth ache. The woman winced, hands moving to cover her ears. "Can you change that?" she called to me. "Or turn it off. It's really grating." I opened my mouth to explain, to tell her that I couldn't, that the jukebox had to be left alone. But before I could speak, she'd already stood up and walked over to the machine. Her hand reached for the cord, clearly intending to unplug it. "Don't." The word came out sharper than I'd intended, loud enough to echo off the walls. The woman jerked back, startled, and in that moment the jukebox's lights flickered, the colors cycling faster than they should have been able to. The music stopped abruptly, mid-note, leaving a silence that felt somehow hostile. "Sorry," the woman said, backing away from the machine. "I didn't mean to." The jukebox started again. Same song, from the beginning, just as discordant and wrong as before. Then, as soon as it finished, it started over, and over, and over. By the 5th repetition, the woman had gone pale. By the 10th, she packed up her laptop and left money on the table, mumbling something about needing to get back on the road. She practically ran to her car. The song played 47 times that night. I counted each one, standing behind the counter in a diner that felt smaller with each repetition, as if the walls were slowly contracting. The silent regulars came and went as usual, apparently unbothered by the noise. At 5:30, mid-verse, the jukebox finally stopped. The silence that followed felt like a reprieve, like being allowed to breathe again after holding your breath underwater. Beverly listened to my story the next morning with a grim expression. "You did the right thing," warning her. Could have been worse if she'd actually unplugged it. Last time someone did that, every piece of electrical equipment in the place went haywire. Lights exploding, coffee maker sparking, cash register printing receipts on its own for 3 hours straight. Cost us thousands in repairs. And even then, some things never work quite right again. "Why does it do this?" I asked. The jukebox, the spills, the regulars who aren't really people. "What is this place?" Beverly was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee as if reading something in the dark surface. "The Crossroads has been here since 1952, she finally said. But there was something here before the diner. This land, this specific spot where the roads meet, it's always been a threshold. Between places, between states of being. The diner's founder, a man named Ernest Whitmore, he knew what he was building on. Thought he could contain it, control it, turn it into something useful. He made deals, put protections in place, established rules. The diner's been operating on those rules ever since. We're not really servers here, Daniel. We're more like caretakers, maintaining a balance, keeping both sides satisfied. Both sides, the regular customers and the other ones, the living and the not quite living. This place serves both, has to serve both, or the balance tips and things get very bad very quickly." I wanted to ask more, but Beverly stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "You're doing fine," she said. "Better than most new hires. Just remember, the rules aren't arbitrary. They're survival instructions. Every single one of them was learned the hard way by someone who came before you. Respect that." The lost and found box revealed itself the following week. It sat on a shelf in the back room, a wooden crate that looked older than the diner itself. I noticed it before but assumed it was just storage. Then one morning, after a particularly strange night where I'd heard conversations coming from empty booths, Beverly pointed at it. "Check the box," she said. "Sometimes things appear." Inside I found a tarnished pocket watch with no hands, a locket containing a photograph of no one, just empty space where a face should be, and a set of keys that were too cold to touch, frost forming on them despite the warm air. There was a ledger next to the box, pages yellowed and crowded with decades of entries. I added the new items to the list, careful not to touch any of them with my bare hands, using a towel as Beverly had instructed. "What happens to them?" I asked. "They stay there. No one ever claims them. No one ever asks about them. And we never, ever try to find out who they belong to. These objects, they're echoes of something. Fragments. If you go looking for their source, that source might look back. That night, I heard the voices again, coming from booth 7 while it sat completely empty. Two people having a conversation, words unclear but tone unmistakable. An argument, growing heated. I kept my eyes on my prep work, rolling silverware, focusing on the simple repetitive motion. The argument escalated to shouting, then to sounds I didn't want to identify. Then silence, sudden and complete. When I finally dared to look up, booth 7 was still empty. But on the table sat 2 coffee cups I hadn't placed there, both still steaming, both untouched. They remained there until dawn, when they faded like morning mist, leaving no trace they'd ever existed. 6 months in, and I've learned to navigate the crossroads' strange waters. But I was beginning to understand that knowing the rules was just the first step. The real question wasn't what the rules were, but why they existed in the first place, and what would happen if the delicate balance Beverly spoke of ever tipped too far in the wrong direction. The light in the back room never went out. I'd noticed it my first night, but hadn't thought much about it at the time. Just another quirk of an old building with inconsistent wiring. It was a single bare bulb, maybe 60 watts, casting a harsh yellow glow over the storage area where we kept extra supplies, cleaning products, and that cursed lost and found box. During my second month, I mentioned to Beverly that the light seemed to be burning out, flickering occasionally, the filament clearly near the end of its life. Her reaction was immediate and intense. "That light stays on," she said, gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks. "No matter what. Even if it looks like it's about to die, even if it's flickering, even if it's barely glowing, that light does not get turned off. Not for any reason. Not to change the bulb, not to save electricity, nothing. Do you understand me?" I nodded, startled by her vehemence. In all my time working with Beverly, I'd never seen her look genuinely frightened until that moment. "There's something in that room," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Has been since before I started working here. Ernest Whitmore, the original owner, he locked it in there somehow, bound it to that space. The light is part of the binding. It's a seal, a ward, call it whatever you want. But as long as that light burns, whatever's in there stays dormant. The one time I went out, back in 1987, we had 3 servers quit the same night. The things they saw, the things that came out of that room." She trailed off, shaking her head. "We got the light back on within an hour, but it was an hour too long. Took weeks for the diner to feel normal again. If normal is even the word for this place. What's in there?" I had to ask. "Don't know. Don't want to know. All I know is that the light stays on, and we all make it through our shifts alive. That's the deal." From that night forward, I checked that light obsessively. Multiple times per shift, I'd open the back room door, just enough to verify the bulb was still burning. Sometimes it glowed steadily. Other times it flickered like a candle in wind that didn't exist. Once at around 3 in the morning, I opened the door to find the light pulsing in rhythm with something I could almost hear. A sound just below the threshold of actual noise, more felt than heard. I closed the door quickly and didn't check again until dawn. The back room wasn't the only source of strangeness. The emergency exit presented its own set of concerns, though I didn't learn about it until I'd been working there for 3 months. It was a standard metal door with a push bar, located at the far end of the dining room, near the kitchen. Fire code required it to remain unlocked during business hours, and I'd assumed the same rule applied during the night shift. I was wrong. It was 2:45 on a Thursday morning when I heard the handle rattle. Not from inside the diner, but from outside. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. The door was locked, had been locked since my shift started, though I hadn't locked it myself. The rattling continued, patient and persistent, a steady testing of the mechanism. I stood frozen behind the counter, watching the door. The silent regulars occupied their usual booths, unmoving shadows. The rattling stopped. For a moment, I thought whatever was outside had given up. Then the knocking started. 3 deliberate strikes against the metal, loud enough to echo through the empty diner. Then silence. Then 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same force. It continued like that for 20 minutes. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. Mechanical in its precision, inhuman in its patience. I didn't approach the door. Some instinct deeper than training told me that responding, even acknowledging the sound, would be a terrible mistake. At 3:15, the knocking stopped. I waited another 10 minutes before I finally moved from behind the counter, approaching the emergency exit with cautious steps. The door was still locked. I peered through the small window, set at head height, but the exterior light had burned out, leaving only darkness visible. As I watched, something moved in that darkness. Not a shape I could identify, just a shift in the density of the black, like oil moving through water. I backed away slowly and returned to my work. The next morning, I asked Beverly about the emergency exit. She nodded as if she'd been expecting the question. "You check it at the start of every shift," she instructed. "Make sure it's locked from the inside. And you never, ever prop it open, not even for a second to carry out trash or catch a breeze on a hot night. That door is a one-way passage, but not in the direction you'd think. It's not about keeping things inside the diner. It's about keeping things outside from getting in." "What's trying to get in?" "Leftovers," Beverly said cryptically. "Pieces of things that used to be whole. The crossroads exists at an intersection, remember? Not just of roads, but of realities. Sometimes things slip through the cracks, drawn to thresholds, to liminal spaces. That emergency exit is a weak point in the diner's protections. The lock helps, but mostly it's about not inviting anything in, not acknowledging it, not giving it permission. The coffee cup ritual was perhaps the strangest rule of all, and the one that made the least sense until I saw what happened when it wasn't followed. Every night, after the last regular customer left, usually around 1 or 2 in the morning, I was supposed to take a clean coffee cup and place it upside down on the counter. Just one cup, centered on the Formica surface, where any customer walking in would see it immediately. I followed this instruction without question for weeks, watching as the cup sat there untouched throughout the strange hours, then disappeared by dawn. I never saw it vanish. One moment it would be there, and the next time I looked, it would be gone. No sign it had ever existed. Then came the night I forgot. It was a busy shift, relatively speaking, several normal customers, more than usual, and my attention was divided between them and the silent regulars. By the time the last regular customer left at 2:30, I was focused on cleanup and prep work for the breakfast rush. The upturned coffee cup completely slipped my mind. I realized my mistake at 3:45 when I heard footsteps behind me. Not the soundless arrival of the silent regulars, but actual footsteps, heavy boots on linoleum. I turned to find a man standing at the counter, though I'd heard no door, no bell, no indication of entry. He was tall, dressed in clothing that seemed out of time, like photographs from the 1950s. His face was ordinary enough, but his eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like looking into wells that had no bottom. "Coffee," he said, his voice flat and somehow distant, as if coming from somewhere far away. My hands shook as I reached for a cup. That's when I noticed. The man cast no shadow. The overhead lights threw my shadow across the counter, sharp and defined, but where the man stood, there was nothing. Just floor, uninterrupted by any darkness. I poured the coffee, my mind racing through Beverly's instructions, trying to remember if there was a rule for this situation. The man didn't touch the cup. He just stared at it, then at me, then back at the coffee. Minutes passed. Neither of us moved. The air in the diner grew colder with each second, my breath starting to mist in front of my face despite the warm May night outside. Finally, the man spoke again. "Wrong cup. You forgot the first cup." Understanding hit me like cold water. The upturned cup on the counter. The ritual I'd forgotten. This was the consequence. I'll fix it, I said, reaching for another cup. The man's hand shot out, faster than should have been possible, gripping my wrist. His touch was freezing, painful like frostbite setting in instantly. Too late, he said. The first cup holds the door closed. Without it, the door opens. And when the door opens, we walk through. His grip tightened, ice crystals forming on my skin. I could feel cold spreading on my arm, into my shoulder, toward my chest. Panic overrode caution. I yanked my hand back, breaking his grip, and ran for the back room. Behind me, I heard more footsteps. Not just one pair, many pairs. All of them heavy, all of them purposeful. I burst into the back room and grabbed the first thing I could find, a coffee cup from the storage shelf. I ran back out, the footsteps growing louder, and slammed the cup upside down on the counter with enough force that I was surprised it didn't shatter. The footsteps stopped. The man at the counter was gone. The diner was empty again, just me and the silent regulars in their booths, unchanged by the chaos. My wrist bore red marks that would fade to bruises by morning, and the cold in my bones took hours to fully dissipate. When Beverly arrived at dawn and saw the bruises, she didn't ask questions. She just nodded, a sad knowing in her eyes. "You forgot the cup," she said. It wasn't a question. "I won't forget again, I promised." "No," she agreed. "You won't. The ones who forget twice don't usually come back for a third shift." She told me the story then, sitting in a booth while the first sunlight painted the walls golden. Ernest Whitmore had opened a Crossroads in 1952, but he'd been planning it for years before that. He'd studied the intersection, the strange reports from travelers, the local legends about people who'd gone missing on those roads. Whitmore believed he could harness whatever force existed at the crossroads, use it to his advantage. He'd made agreements, performed rituals, established the rules that govern the diner's operation. "The cup on the counter is the simplest protection," Beverly explained. "A symbolic door, closed and sealed. It tells whatever's out there that the night is claimed, that this space is occupied and not open for entry. Forget it, and you're essentially sending an invitation. The things that wait in the spaces between, they can't resist an invitation." "What was that, man?" I asked. "Not a man. Not anymore. Maybe once long ago, but now? Just an echo, a hunger with a shape. The crossroads attracts them, these fragments of things that used to be people. They exist in the gaps, the in-between places, and they're always looking for a way back into the world. That's why the rules exist. Not to hurt us, but to protect us from what waits outside the rules' boundaries." I thought about that light in the back room, burning constantly, about the emergency exit that had to stay locked, about the silent regulars who appeared and disappeared without warning. All of it was connected, pieces of a system designed to maintain balance, to keep the crossroads functioning as both a diner and something far stranger. "Why do you stay?" I asked Beverly. "Why not just quit? Find work somewhere normal?" She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Because someone has to maintain the balance. Someone has to keep the rules, serve the customers, both kinds. If this place closes, if the protections fail, everything that's been contained here for 70 years walks free. All those echoes, all those fragments, all the things that shouldn't exist anymore, they'd spread out into the world, drawn to other crossroads, other thresholds. This diner is a cage and a sanctuary both. Abandon it, and you don't solve the problem. You just spread it wider." The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. I wasn't just a night shift worker. I was a guardian, a keeper of boundaries most people didn't even know existed. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the diner's walls, things waited patiently for any mistake, any forgotten rule, any crack in the protections that kept them at bay. The silent regulars had patterns. Over the months I'd worked at the crossroads, I'd learned to anticipate their arrivals, to recognize the subtle signs that preceded their appearance. Booth 3 always arrived first. usually between 2 and 2:15. Booth 5 followed around 2:30. Booth 7 came last, never earlier than 3. They were clockwork, these shadow customers, as reliable as sunrise. Until the night, they all arrived at once. I was wiping down the counter at 1:45 when the temperature dropped, not gradually, but instantly, like someone had opened a door to the Arctic. My breath misted in front of my face, and when I looked up, all 3 booths were occupied. Booth 3, Booth 5, Booth 7, all at once, all early. The shadows that comprised them seemed darker than usual, more substantial, as if they were pulling the light from the air itself. The diner's fluorescent fixtures dimmed, flickering in a pattern that made my head ache. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. I moved on autopilot, pouring black coffee for Booth 3, filling a glass with water and lemon for Booth 5, cutting and heating a slice of cherry pie for Booth 7. My hands were steady despite the fear crawling up my spine, despite every instinct screaming that I should run. But there was nowhere to run. The crossroads didn't let you run. You followed the rules, or you suffer the consequences. As I served Booth 3, I made the mistake of glancing sideways at the figure seated there. Not directly looking, but a peripheral glimpse. What I saw made my stomach clench. The shadow had depth to it, layers upon layers of darkness, and within those layers, faces. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pressed against some invisible membrane, mouths open in silent screams. I jerked my gaze away and forced myself to keep moving. Booth 5 was worse. The water I set down began to freeze immediately, ice crystals spreading across the surface, climbing up the sides of the glass like living things. The lemon slice turned black, withering as if decades were passing in seconds. I backed away slowly, fighting the urge to grab the glass and flee to the kitchen. Booth 7 accepted the pie without incident, or so I thought. As I turned to leave, I heard a sound behind me. Not words, exactly, but something that wanted to be words, a vocalization that human vocal cords could never produce. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and every primitive survival instinct in my brain fired at once. I walked back to the counter without running, though it took everything I had. The night stretched on, each minute feeling like an hour. The silent regulars didn't leave. They sat in their booths, untouching their orders, radiating wrongness into the air. At 3 o'clock, the bell rang as always, but this time it was different. Instead of one clear chime, it rang 7 times, each tone slightly lower than the last, until the final ring was more vibration than sound, a frequency I felt in my bones rather than heard. That's when a new customer walked in. I heard the door this time, the bell above it jangling normally, and looked up to see a woman entering the diner. She was young, maybe early 20s, wearing a Pennsylvania State University hoodie and carrying a backpack. Her eyes were red from crying, and she moved with the exhausted stumble of someone who'd been driving too long. "Thank God," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been driving for hours. My GPS stopped working and my phone's dead. I thought I'd never find a place to stop." Every warning bell in my head went off at once. Normal customers didn't come to the crossroads after midnight. Not real ones, anyway. The few who did were usually gone within half an hour, some instinct telling them to leave, to get back on the road, to put distance between themselves and this place. But this woman seemed oblivious to the atmosphere, to the cold, to the shadow figures occupying 3 of the booths. "Coffee?" I managed to ask. "Please, and maybe some food. I haven't eaten since lunch." I poured the coffee with shaking hands, hyper-aware of the silent regulars behind me. They hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to the newcomer, but I could feel their attention shift. The quality of the silence changed, becoming expectant, hungry. The woman chose a booth, thankfully on the opposite side of the diner from the occupied ones. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and closed her eyes, breathing in the steam. "This place is so quiet," she said. "Peaceful. After the night I've had, I really needed this." I wanted to tell her to leave, to get up, get in her car, and drive until she found another diner, a truck stop, anywhere but here. But I couldn't find the words, couldn't figure out how to explain without sounding insane. Instead, I brought her a menu and retreated to the counter. She ordered eggs and toast, comfort food, and I prepared it mechanically in the kitchen, checking the back room light twice while I was there. Still burning, still steady, no flickering. One small mercy in an increasingly dangerous night. When I brought out her food, she smiled up at me, genuine warmth in her expression. "You're a lifesaver. Seriously." I was starting to think I'd have to sleep in my car. "Where are you heading?" I asked, breaking my usual rule of minimal conversation during these hours. "Pittsburgh. My sister's in the hospital. Nothing serious, but I wanted to be there when she wakes up from surgery. I left too late. Should have waited until morning, but I was worried and I thought I could make the drive." She paused, looking around the diner as if really seeing it for the first time. "Are those people okay?" She gestured toward the silent regulars. "They're fine," I said quickly. "They prefer not to be disturbed." She nodded, accepting this explanation, and turned her attention to her food. I watched her eat, watched the clock, watched the shadow figures in their booths. None of them had touched their orders. The coffee in booth 3 sat full and cold. The ice in booth 5's water glass had spread to cover the entire table, a thin layer of frost coating the surface. The pie in booth 7 remained untouched, though the plate beneath it had cracked, a single clean line bisecting the ceramic. At 3:45, the woman asked for her check. I calculated it with trembling fingers, absurdly grateful that she was leaving, that she'd survived her time in the crossroads without incident. She paid in cash, left a generous tip, and stood to leave. That's when booth 7 moved. Not the shadow figure itself, but something within it. A tendril of darkness extended from the booth, stretching across the diner floor like a living thing. It moved with purpose, with intention, reaching toward the woman as she shouldered her backpack. "Wait," I said, the word coming out louder than intended. The woman paused, one hand on the door. The tendril stopped, hovering inches from her foot. "Bathroom," I improvised. "You might want to use it before you get back on the road. Long drive to Pittsburgh." She hesitated, then nodded. "Good idea. Where is it?" I pointed to the hallway near the kitchen, and she headed in that direction. The moment she disappeared from view, the tendril withdrew, sliding back into booth 7 like a snake returning to its den. I stood frozen, understanding that I'd just prevented something terrible, though I didn't fully understand what. The woman emerged from the bathroom 3 minutes later, thanked me again, and left. Through the window, I watched her car start immediately, saw her pull out of the parking lot and onto the dark road beyond. Relief flooded through me so intensely I had to grip the counter to stay upright. The silent regulars remained for another hour. Then, at precisely 4:45, they were gone. All 3 of them vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving behind their untouched orders. The coffee in booth 3 was empty now, though I'd never seen anyone drink it. The water glass in booth 5 sat clean and dry, no trace of ice. The pie plate in booth 7 was whole, uncracked, the slice eaten down to crumbs. Beverly found me sitting in a booth when she arrived at 6:30, still shaking, a cup of coffee grown cold in my hands. She took one look at my face and poured herself a cup, sliding into the seat across from me. "Bad night?" she asked quietly. I told her everything. The early arrival of the regulars, the temperature drop, the faces and shadows. The normal customer who'd wandered in and nearly become something other than a customer. The tendril from booth 7. Beverly listened without interrupting, her expression growing graver with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The balance is shifting," she finally said. When all three show up early, when they stay longer than usual, it means the protections are weakening. Something's been feeding them, making them stronger. What do? We maintain the rules even more strictly. We don't get careless, not even for a second. And we watch for signs that it's getting worse. She paused, meeting my eyes. There's something I haven't told you, Daniel. Something you need to know now that you've seen what you've seen. My stomach nodded. What? Ernest Whitmore didn't just establish rules for the diner. He established a cycle. Every 7 years, the Crossroads demands a renewal of the agreement, a reminder that the protections hold, that the balance remains intact. We're coming up on year 7. What happens during the renewal? Beverly's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Someone has to go into the back room. While the light is on, while whatever's in there is still dormant. They have to perform a ritual, speak certain words, make certain gestures. It takes about 15 minutes. If done correctly, the protections are renewed for another 7 years. If done incorrectly, or not done at all. She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Who usually does it? The owner. Ernest did it himself every 7 years until he died in 1988. The diner changed hands 3 times after that, and each new owner did the renewal. But the current owner, he bought the place 2 years ago. He doesn't believe in the supernatural. Thinks the rules are just quirky traditions, local color to attract tourists. He's never even worked a night shift. Doesn't understand what this place really is. When is the renewal due? Beverly's eyes held mine. 2 weeks from today, October 19th. And if someone doesn't perform it, every single thing that Ernest Whitmore locked away, every protection he put in place, every binding that keeps the wrong things out and the right things contained, all of it fails. Not gradually, all at once. I thought about the thing in the back room, whatever presence the constantly burning light kept dormant. I thought about the faces I'd seen in booth 3 shadows, the tendril for booth 7. I thought about what Beverly had said, about the fragments and echoes spreading out into the world if the Crossroads failed. Teach me the ritual, I said. Beverly shook her head. It's dangerous, Daniel. You have to go into that room, stand in there for 15 minutes with only the light protecting you. The presence in there, it's aware during the ritual. It knows someone's there, and it tests them, tries to break their concentration, terrify them into making mistakes. The last person who failed the ritual, back in 1980, they found him the next morning. Physically, he was fine. Mentally, he never recovered. Spent the rest of his life in an institution, screaming about things with no names. What's the alternative? We let the protections fail. No, there's no alternative. Someone has to do it. I'm too old now. I tried 7 years ago and barely made it through. Nearly had a heart attack from stress. We need someone younger, someone strong enough to withstand whatever that thing throws at them. The weight of what she was asking settled over me. 2 weeks to prepare, to steel myself for 15 minutes in a room with something that should not exist, performing a ritual to maintain protections I barely understood. But the alternative was unthinkable. I'd seen what was already leaking through, already testing the boundaries. If those boundaries fell completely, the consequences would spread far beyond this one diner on 2 forgotten roads. I'll do it, I said. Beverly reached across the table and gripped my hand. Then we start preparing today. I'll teach you everything Ernest taught me. The words, the gestures, the mindset you'll need to survive. You have 2 weeks to become strong enough to face what's in that room. Outside, the sun was fully up now, painting the parking lot in morning gold. The Crossroads looked like any other rural diner in daylight, charming and harmless, no hint of the darkness it contained. But I knew better now. I looked behind the curtain, seeing the machinery that kept reality functioning, and there was no going back to ignorance. The countdown had begun. The 2 weeks passed like a fever dream. During the day, I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with shadows and whispers. During the night, I worked my shifts while Beverly trained me, teaching me words and languages I didn't recognize, showing me hand gestures that made my fingers ache, preparing me for the ritual that would either save the crossroads or destroy me. The protections continued to weaken. I could feel in the air, taste it like copper on my tongue. The silent regulars arrived earlier each night, stayed longer, grew more substantial. Other things began appearing in the diner, things that had never been there before. Shadows that moved against the light, cold spots that walked across the floor like invisible patrons, whispers in the walls that might have been voices or might have been something else entirely. Normal customers stopped coming after midnight. The few who pulled into the parking lot would sit in their cars for a moment, then drive away without ever entering, some unconscious instinct warning them off. We were alone with the strangeness now, Beverly and I, maintaining the rules in a place that was slowly coming apart at the seams. 3 days before the renewal, I arrived for my shift to find Beverly waiting with a metal box I'd never seen before. It was old, the surface covered in scratches and dents, with symbols etched around the edges that hurt to look at directly. "This was Ernest's," she said, setting it on the counter. "Inside is everything you'll need for the ritual. The instructions, written in his own hand. Objects that focus the intention. Protection sigils." She opened the box, revealing yellowed papers covered in cramped handwriting, a small cloth bag, and several items I couldn't identify. "You'll study these tonight. Memorize the words. Practice the gestures until they're muscle memory. When you go into that room, you can't hesitate. You can't doubt. You have to be absolutely certain in your purpose." I spent the quiet hours between customers poring over Ernest's notes. His handwriting was difficult to decipher, but his instructions were clear. The ritual required precise timing, exact words spoken in specific order, physical movements that had to be performed without error. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and the entire thing would fail. The notes also contained warnings, passages underlined multiple times, words that seemed to vibrate with urgency even decades after they'd been written. "The presence will try to break you," Ernest had written. "It will show you things, terrible things, true things, false things, anything to make you stop the ritual. It will speak in voices you know, or faces you love, promise anything you desire. Do not listen. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge it in any way. Your only defense is absolute focus on the ritual itself." 2 days before the renewal, something new appeared in the lost and found box. I was checking it as part of my nightly routine when I saw it. A photograph. Not old and faded like the other items, but recent, printed on modern photo paper. It showed me, standing in the back room, the door open behind me, the light casting harsh shadows across my face. But my expression was wrong. My eyes were wrong. I looked hollow, empty, like something wearing my shape but not my soul. I showed it to Beverly when she arrived. Her face went pale. "They're showing you the potential failure," she said. "What you might become if the ritual goes wrong. They're trying to scare you out of attempting it." "Is it working?" I asked, only half joking. "Only you can answer that." The night before the renewal, I didn't sleep. I spent the day sitting in my apartment, going over the ritual steps in my mind, speaking the words under my breath, moving my hands through the gestures. By the time evening came, my body knew the pattern so deeply it was almost instinctive. Almost. I arrived at the diner at 10:30, 30 minutes early. Beverly was already there, along with someone I didn't recognize. An old man, maybe 80, with sharp eyes and a presence that commanded attention. "Daniel, this is Raymond Howell," Beverly said. "He performed the ritual in 1994 and 2001. He's here to witness your attempt and provide guidance if needed." Raymond shook my hand with surprising strength. "The key is not to think," he said, his voice gravelly but firm. "Once you start, you become the ritual. The words speak themselves. The gestures flow. You're just a vessel, a conduit. The moment you start analyzing, questioning, doubting, that's when they get in. That's when you fail. At 11:45, Beverly handed me the cloth bag from Ernest's box. Inside were objects of power, she'd called them. Things that helped anchor the ritual, that gave the words weight and substance. I didn't ask what they were. Some knowledge was better left vague. The diner was empty of regular customers. Just us, waiting. At midnight, the silent regulars arrived, all three at once, taking their positions. The temperature dropped. The lights flickered, and I knew it was time. The ritual begins at 12:15, Beverly said. That gives the presence time to wake fully, to be aware of what's happening. You'll enter the back room, close the door behind you, and begin. 15 minutes, Daniel. Just 15 minutes. And this place is protected for another 7 years. And if I fail, then we run, Raymond said flatly. We run, and we hope we get far enough away before everything in this place breaks loose. At 12:10, I stood before the backroom door, the cloth bag clutched in my hand, Ernest's words cycling through my mind. Beverly and Raymond stood behind me, their presence both comforting and terrifying. This was real. This was happening. In 5 minutes, I would step into a room with something that shouldn't exist and attempt to bind it for another 7 years. Remember, Beverly said softly, don't listen to it. Don't look at it. Don't acknowledge anything it shows you. The ritual is everything. Nothing else matters. 12:15 came. I opened the door. The light burned, as always, that single bare bulb casting harsh yellow illumination over the storage shelves. Nothing seemed different. Nothing seemed wrong. But I could feel it immediately, a presence that filled the room like thick water, pressing against my skin, my eyes, my mind. It was awake. It was aware. And it was not happy. I closed the door behind me, sealing myself in with it. The temperature plummeted, my breath coming out in white clouds. I opened the cloth bag and began removing the objects, placing them in a circle on the floor according to Ernest's instructions. A compass that pointed to no direction, a candle that burned without flame, a mirror that showed only darkness, a key that fit no lock. Each one went in its precise position, each one adding to the pattern, to the binding. Then I began to speak. The words were ancient, pulling at something deep in the air itself. As I spoke, the light flickered. Shadows gathered in the corners, growing thicker, more substantial. I kept my eyes on the objects, my hands moving through the gestures, my voice steady despite the fear racing through my veins. The presence responded. I felt it surge, pushing against me, testing my resolve. The temperature dropped further. Ice formed on the walls, on the shelves, crawling across the floor toward the circle I'd created. But the circle held, the objects glowing faintly, their power keeping the cold at bay. Daniel. The voice came from behind me. My mother's voice, concerned and loving. I didn't turn. I didn't acknowledge it. I continued the ritual, speaking the next set of words, moving my hands in the prescribed patterns. Daniel, please. I need your help. Still my mother's voice, but with an undercurrent now. Something wrong beneath the familiar tone. I focused on the candle, watching its flameless burn, letting the words flow through me rather than from me. Vessel, not source. Conduit, not origin. The presence changed tactics. Images flickered at the edge of my vision. My apartment on fire. Beverly lying motionless on the diner floor. Raymond screaming. All false, I knew. All designed to break my concentration. I didn't look. I didn't respond. The ritual consumed everything, left no room for distraction or doubt. 5 minutes in, the attacks intensified. The light went out. Complete darkness swallowed the room, so absolute it felt solid. I couldn't see the objects, couldn't see my own hands, but I could feel them, their positions burned into my mind through hours of practice. I continued speaking, continued moving, trusting muscle memory and Raymond's advice. Don't think, just be. Something touched my shoulder. Cold fingers, impossibly long, pressing through my shirt. I wanted to scream, to run, to break the circle and flee the room. But I held my ground, spoke the words, maintained the pattern. The touch withdrew. The light came back on at 7 minutes, but it was wrong. Instead of yellow, it glowed red, painting everything in shades of blood. The shadows had faces now, hundreds of them, pressing against invisible barriers, their mouths open in eternal silence. I saw myself among them, that hollow version from the photograph, reaching toward me with empty eyes. 10 minutes, more than halfway. But the hardest part was still coming. The final sequence required absolute precision, words that had to be spoken in perfect unison with gestures timed to the second. One mistake here would unravel everything I built. The room began to spin, not physically, but perceptually, my sense of up and down becoming confused. I felt like I was falling, even though my feet remained planted on solid ground. Nausea surged through me while rising in my throat. I swallowed it down and continued. Stop. This voice was different, not borrowed from my memories, but the presence's own voice, if it could be called that. It sounded like metal scraping on metal, like wind through dead trees, like the last breath of drowning victims. It was the sound of ending, of entropy, of everything grinding to a halt. Stop the ritual. Release me. I can give you anything. I reached the final sequence. The words came faster now, building toward crescendo. My hands moved through patterns that created afterimages in the air, lines of light that lingered for seconds before fading. The objects in the circle began to hum, a frequency that resonated in my bones. I can bring them back. Everyone you've lost, everyone you've loved. I can remake the world in your image. Just stop. Just let me out. 13 minutes. 2 more to go. The light was strobing now, red to yellow to darkness and back, cycling faster and faster. The walls were bleeding, or appeared to be, dark liquid running down the painted surface. The shelves were melting, the floor was cracking, reality itself was breaking down around me. But the circle held, the objects held, the ritual held. Please, that single word, spoken in a voice that was somehow worse than all the others, a voice that contained genuine desperation, genuine fear. The presence knew it was losing, knew that the binding would succeed, and in its desperation, it was showing me its true face. I made the mistake of looking up. What I saw in those final seconds before the ritual completed, I cannot fully describe. It was vast and terrible and hungry beyond comprehension. It was old, so old that human history was a blank in its endless existence. And it was trapped, bound to this space by agreements made long before I was born, forced to exist in a perpetual half-state between worlds. 14 minutes. 30 seconds left. I spoke the final words, made the final gestures, and felt power surge through the circle. The objects flare bright, so bright I had to close my eyes. A sound like a massive door slamming echoed through the room, through the building, maybe through reality itself. Then silence. I opened my eyes. The light burned yellow and steady. The walls were just walls, the shelves just shelves. The ice was gone, the blood was gone, the faces and the shadows had vanished. The objects in my circle were dull and lifeless now, their power expended, and the presence was dormant again, pushed back into whatever prison Ernest Whitmore had created for it 70 years ago. 15 minutes exactly. The ritual was complete. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely gather the objects and return them to the cloth bag. Every muscle ached, as if I'd run a marathon. My head pounded with a migraine that would last for days. But I'd done it. The protections were renewed. The crossroads was safe for another 7 years. I stumbled out of the back room to find Beverly and Raymond waiting, their faces pale with tension. When they saw me alive, functional, rational, relief flooded their expressions. It worked, Beverly asked. It worked. Raymond nodded approvingly. Well done, son. Not many people have the strength for what you just did. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. The silent regulars left at their normal times. The diner felt lighter. The oppressive weight that had been building for weeks suddenly lifted. By the time dawn broke, the crossroads looked and felt like it had when I first started working there 6 months ago. Different from normal diners. Yes. Strange and unsettling. Absolutely. But stable. Protected. Safe, relatively speaking. Beverly made me breakfast before I left. Eggs and toast and coffee, so strong it could wake the dead. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? I'd looked into the abyss, performed an impossible ritual, and survived. Words felt inadequate to capture that experience. You'll stay? She finally asked. Keep working the night shift. I thought about it. Thought about the normal jobs I could get. Normal work with normal problems. Thought about walking away from the crossroads, from the rules, from the responsibility. Then I thought about what would happen if no one maintained this place, if the next renewal in 7 years found no one prepared to perform it. I'll stay, I said. Someone has to. She smiled, genuine warmth in her eyes. Honest would have liked you. He always said the best guardians were the ones who understood what they were guarding against. I left the diner as the morning shift was arriving. Normal employees who worked during daylight hours, who would never know what existed in the space they occupied. They'd clean tables and pour coffee and serve pie. And beneath their feet, the protections would hold, the boundaries would remain intact, and the things that waited in the darkness would stay dormant. For 7 more years, at least. The Crossroads Diner still operates today. You can find it if you know where to look, at the intersection of 2 roads in rural Pennsylvania that most maps don't show. During the day, it's charming and ordinary, a slice of Americana preserved in chrome and vinyl. But after midnight, it becomes something else. A threshold, a boundary, a cage and a sanctuary both. And if you're ever driving through Pennsylvania late at night, and you find yourself pulled into a parking lot you don't remember choosing, and you walk into a diner that feels subtly wrong in ways you can't quite articulate, remember this. Follow the rules. All of them, even the ones that don't make sense. Especially those ones. Because the rules aren't arbitrary. They're survival instructions, written in the experiences of everyone who came before you. They're the difference between walking out at dawn and becoming one more shadow in the booths, one more face in the lost and found, one more warning for the next person who thinks they know better. The Crossroads serves 2 kinds of customers, the living and the not quite living. And the only thing keeping those categories separate is a set of bizarre rules followed by people like me. People who understand that some places exist between worlds, that some jobs require more than just showing up for a paycheck, that some responsibilities are too important to abandon. I work the night shift at a haunted Pennsylvania diner. The rules are bizarre, but they're also the only thing standing between our world and something that should have stayed forgotten. And in 7 years, I'll go back into that room and face the presence again. I'll speak the words and make the gestures and renew the protections that keep it bound. Because that's what guardians do. We hold the line. We maintain the balance. We follow the rules, no matter how strange they seem. Even when our hands shake. Even when our hearts race. Even when every instinct tells us to run. Especially then. The Crossroads will still be here tomorrow night. And the night after that. And the night after that. Serving coffee and pie and maintaining boundaries most people will never know exist. And I'll be there too, behind the counter, watching the clock, waiting for the silent regulars to arrive. Because someone has to. And for now, that someone is me.